Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, dubious speculation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, we've been following these trends for Bitcoin in the pre-halving year of spending about half the year going up and about half the year going down. And what's interesting is we've also been following the bull market support band, which, as you know, consists of the 20-week SMA or simple moving average and the 21-week EMA or exponential moving average. I saw someone in the comments a few videos ago say that I always say SMA and EMA, but I've never actually said what those actually mean. So if you are unfamiliar with one, simple moving average is just sort of equally weighting all those data points. So if you're talking about a 20-week simple moving average, it's just an equal weight of the last 20 weeks. An EMA, an exponential moving average, actually weights more recent price movements heavier, right? So it'll put more weight into recent data than data further back. And that's why EMAs are quicker to respond to price movements than simple moving averages are. Now that we got that out of the way, I do want to talk a little bit about what we've previously discussed and how what is happening on this chart is still very much within the realm of prior expectations. Okay, so one of the things that we've said is that going into the death cross that Bitcoin got not that long ago, we said, all right, guys, what's likely going to happen is we will see a very brief move up, then a move down into the death cross. We drew the path out in a prior video, then a move up as the death cross occurs. And if you look when this death cross occurred back here in mid-September, you can see that that is where Bitcoin started its, what I like to call it, its death cross rally. The death cross rally, as far as I'm concerned, and I've said many times, what it normally leads to is a lower high, okay? Now, I know it's not a popular theory. I know it's not a popular view to have because we of course have a lot of people calling for much higher prices this year. But typically, this death cross rally ultimately leads to nothing more than a lower high, which then leads to a lower low and taking out these prior lows. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about this before the death cross occurred was because I've seen historically what happens is when you get a death cross, you go down into it, the death cross news makes the headlines, people sell into it, and then Bitcoin rallies after it happens. And then people then buy as Bitcoin rallies back up, only to get sucked back in and then for Bitcoin to go back down. This happens quite frequently with death cross rallies, okay? So hopefully, you were able to better anticipate that move. Again, it didn't have to happen. There's always a probability that what we suggested would not have played out, but it seems like so far it has, right? We did get a rally into the death cross. Now, I guess what's more up for debate is, does it just simply lead to a lower high, which is what I think is the most likely outcome, or does it lead to a higher high? I suspect that the yearly highs are in for Bitcoin, and I've said this for quite a while now. I think that, when you look at the context of history, pre-halving years in 2011 and 2019 saw Bitcoin price top out in the summer, right? This top here was in June. This top here was in June as well. The one that we got in 2015, we actually got a new high in November. So it is important to note that we have previously seen that move. However, there is a nuance to that in that in 2015, we actually spent most of the first half of the year going down rather than up. And in 2011, 2019, and 2023, we actually spent most of the first half of the year going up rather than down. And so I would argue that it's more similar to 2011 and 2019 in that regard, and that it is likely just to result in lower highs. So locally, you can see what's giving Bitcoin trouble. One of the moving averages is the 200-week SMA, right? The 200-week SMA has historically been a level of support for Bitcoin in prior cycles, but right now we are finding it as resistance. If you're not familiar with where the 200-week SMA sits, just so you can keep an eye on it, it's currently at around $28,173. So just a bit higher from where we currently are, about $1,000 higher. Now, if we continue on and look at some daily moving averages, what you will note is that both the 100-day and the 200-day sort of converged here, where Bitcoin got rejected back on October 8th or October 7th, right? In this range, you can see the 100 and 200 days sort of came together here, and Bitcoin was unable to get above those moving averages. Now today, the 100-day moving average is at 27,968, and the 200-day moving average is $28,039. So again, they're both around that $28,000 level, and it doesn't mean that we can't go back up to 28K. We could even wick above it, right? I mean, it's certainly possible that we do, but the point is that so far these moving averages are rolling over, and it looks like what maybe was previously support has now potentially turned into resistance, and it's just a slow process, right? Just a slow process. I'll remind people that in 2019, it wasn't really until the end of the year where a lot of people were even willing to admit that it was a downtrend, right? Because we spent so many months sort of getting close to sort of breaking out from these lower highs, but they were always nothing more than lower highs, right? That's what they were. They just ended up being one lower high after another. This was a rally into a recession that was essentially a double top, and then the recession came. So when I look at this today, I see a lot of people that are quite bullish on this price action, but I also see that it's likely forming a lower high. So you have your high here, and then you have sort of like another lower high here, and then potentially another lower high as well. One of the reasons that I continue to carry this bias is because that I believe that a lot of cryptocurrencies are a function of excess liquidity. And I believe the reason that Bitcoin has had its rally this year is not because of the ETF stuff. It's not because of all the narratives that you see. It's just simply because liquidity has been drying up, and therefore people are going from higher risk cryptocurrencies to lower risk cryptocurrencies, meaning going from like altcoins to Bitcoin. And it's been that liquidity from the altcoin market that has helped support the rally by Bitcoin. The unfortunate side effect of this is that the purchasing power of all these altcoins to buy, to accumulate Satoshis goes down as their Bitcoin valuations go down. So had you converted altcoins to Bitcoin, say, at the beginning of the year, you could have been able to purchase a larger sum of Bitcoin with those altcoins. But today, most of these altcoins are down a lot against Bitcoin. So as more people convert their alts to Bitcoin, they're just simply not getting as much Bitcoin. Therefore, arguably, it's just less buying pressure that's even coming into Bitcoin just because liquidity is continuing to dry up. And the reason that it likely puts in a lower high, it's not because of any narrative. I know everyone's going to talk about these narratives, but the reason, in my view, is just simply because there's not enough liquidity, and liquidity is everything in the cryptoverse, right? That's everything, is liquidity, okay? And if there's not enough liquidity in the altcoin market to support the price of Bitcoin, then what ends up happening is that it just simply puts in a lower high, okay? It puts in a lower high. And then it eventually leads to a lower low, right? Meaning taking out these prior lows over here and going below that 24.8, 24.9 level. So that is what I'm still looking at as the most likely outcome in the short term, that we do find some type of rejection up at these levels. Again, it doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't wick back up or something, but I would expect a rejection, a lower high, and then to take out this level here. And I mean, again, maybe by the end of the year, it'll be a bit more obvious that, okay, maybe this is a downtrend, but early on, it's really hard to sort of convince people of that. It's the same thing with like Ethereum. I mean, if you go look at Ethereum, which we did a long video on yesterday, a lot of people have been very bullish on ETH for a long time, right? But you can see that it topped out in April, and then in July it was a lower high, and then so far we've just seen another lower high again, and it's been nothing more than that, right? And this is also a low and a lower low, right? So you have a series of lower highs and lower lows, which is characteristic, of course, of a downtrend. But it's difficult to make people believe that, especially early on in the trend, because they want to believe that it'll just go to new highs and to continue that trend. But you can see Ethereum is rolling over, and if you go look at, say, the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation, right, that has been dropping a lot. So that goes back to that liquidity idea, that for people who are converting their ETH to Bitcoin sort of this late in the game, they're not getting as much Bitcoin as if they would have done it, say, a year ago, right? I mean, a year ago, the ratio was closer to 8.5%. Now the ratio is at 5.7%. So you're not going to be able to get as much Bitcoin for your ETH if you make the conversion now as if you would have a year ago. And the same thing applies for a lot of the altcoin market, right? The same thing generally applies. If you look at Bitcoin on a weekly time frame and you look at the 100-week moving average, I thought this was an interesting moving average because it seems like this one could be sort of keeping the price of Bitcoin at bay. Is that 100-week moving average? You can see that Bitcoin has been unable to get back above it this year, right? And you can see over here when we put in this high in mid-July, the 100-week SMA was at 32,362, and the price of Bitcoin that week went up to 31,829. So the 100-week has sort of kept Bitcoin, or the price of Bitcoin has stayed below the 100-week SMA really since May of 2022. The reason why that's relevant is because you can kind of see we've rallied back up to it, but we've been unable to get back above it. And currently the 100-week SMA is now at 28,920. So almost $2,000 above the current prices, but again, we still are unable to get above it. On a lower term moving average, going to the bull market support band, what you'll see is that we had our death cross rally, and we've suggested that it will likely lead to a lower high. And we've also suggested that a potential lower high could form near the bull market support band or that 20-week SMA, 21-week EMA. Now, as I said before, those correspond to approximately $28,000. We have wicked above it. We've gone to almost $28,600. But we saw one weekly close above the 20-week SMA. We then said that if you're a bull, you need to see follow through on that if you want it to really be meaningful, right? And I've said before, again, I think it likely ends up being a lower high. And what you can see is that we were unable to get a weekly close above it, consecutively. And we've said you would need to see multiple, consecutive weekly closes in a row to sort of question the general thesis that at least for me to question it. But so far we had this one weekly close above it, no follow through, right? A weekly close below it. If you zoom in, you can see that this week, that 20-week SMA was at 27,978, and we closed the week at 27,932. So about $40 below the 20-week SMA is where the weekly candle ended up closing. And then this week, at least so far, we've seen us open just around that 20-week moving average, and now we've come all the way back down to below the 21-week EMA. Okay, so far it seems like our prior expectations have been met, right? You get a brief sell-off a few days before the death cross. You then rally the day of the death cross. You potentially top out at the bull market support band. And we said, we could go back up to 28K. It's possible we go to 29, right? But I think there is a good chance here that this is already the topping pattern that the Bitcoin's putting in. And then the issue becomes that as liquidity dries up in the altcoin market and Bitcoin really starts to roll over, then, how far down can it go? I've said before that I think an initial target is likely 23K. The reason I say that is, and again, it's taking a little longer to get there, but the reason I say that is because if you look back over here, that was actually where there was, some consolidation, right? And so on these monthly candles, that would be seemingly the most obvious retracement level, or at least initially, would be around that 23K. So I still do think that there is a case that happens. Do note that in 2019, when we had a death cross rally, if we were to zoom in to really what occurred over here in 2019, what you'll see is that Bitcoin had this death cross rally starting on about late October. But then by late November, a little over a month later, Bitcoin sort of took out that low. So if you were to extrapolate that to today or sort of project forward a similar type pattern, this low occurred in about mid-September, September 11th, and we are, essentially a month after that. So if it follows what it did in 2019, it would mean that over the next few days, you could see Bitcoin, sort of take out those lows. It is probably, it's still pretty far up here. Back in 2019, Bitcoin, was basically trending down almost just a few days after the death cross because the rally was so swift, and then it was just sort of a slow bleed down. So far this time, we haven't really seen that, right? It was more of a slower move up, and I mean, yes, we've seen the last few days be red, and a rejection off the 200-day SMA, a rejection off the 200-week SMA, a rejection off the 100-day SMA, and potentially rejection off the 20-week SMA. But it still is still well off these lows. Again, I do think that these lows will be taken out, and that when those lows are taken out, I think it's going to be absolutely devastating for the altcoin market, because the altcoin market has barely hung on to these valuations when Bitcoin has been fairly risk on. We've been in an upward trend for the first half of the year, but the issue is when you get into these pre-halving years, you go up long enough to give the bulls a false sense of security, right? They dunk on the bears. It's sort of like when you get through the bear market year, 2022, the bears have a false sense of security, the market goes up, and then the market goes up long enough to give the bulls a false sense of security, and then the market goes down. And that way, by the end of the year, both bulls and bears are, again, as we've said, sufficiently wrecked so that the market is more or less fully reset going into the halving year. That doesn't mean prices can't go down in the halving year. We saw prices go down in 2020 thanks to the pandemic, which of course was a recession, a very brief one. And we could see something play out like that again, right? Where Bitcoin goes and takes out these lows, crushes the altcoin market. And if there's not a recession, then you could start to make the case of looking, trying to make the case for somewhere of a macro higher low. But if there is a recession, then it could become a lot worse. So I think that is the most, what I'm looking at today, what I think is the most relevant things to think about when it comes to Bitcoin. And that's really, when you think about sort of the macro side of things, the liquidity side of things, that's the reason I'm not really in the camp of this thing just running up, pre-halving too much, right? Because the macro conditions just simply, in my opinion, right? Again, I could be wrong, right? But the macro conditions, in my opinion, don't really justify it running up too much from here. Okay, so to recap, Bitcoin had the death cross rally. We have found some resistance at some of these key moving averages that we followed, including the bull market support band. There has been no follow through on weekly closes above the bull market support band, which is what we said you would want to look for if I want to continue or start to potentially question the thesis that I have. That hasn't happened, so I'm going to assume the status quo remains unchanged. And I think that the altcoin market continues the liquidity in the altcoin market continues to dry up, so that there just simply is not enough liquidity to support the price of Bitcoin going to new yearly highs. Therefore, the most likely outcome is that it puts in a lower high and then puts in a lower low. And when it does, it crushes the altcoin market. And then people find what's up and really go into, figure out exactly how far down the altcoin market can go. Because, look at 2019. I mean, the altcoin market trended down into the end of the year. It spent the first half of the year going up. The altcoin market just trended down for basically the entire second half of 2019. So I don't think this time is different. I think we are likely going to see these altcoins continue down. And I think there honestly will be a capitulation event to really kick us into the depression phase. I don't think this is the depression phase. I think we're kind of slowly entering it. But in some altcoins, we've already entered it, right? Some of these altcoins have already been putting in new lows, but the collective altcoin market has not yet put in a lower low. And I think once that happens, that will be equivalent to the depression phase, right? So in total 3, the altcoin market is no longer putting in higher lows, right? So once we take that out, which I think could happen, assuming Bitcoin goes down and puts in a lower low below 24.8K, I think that's where the altcoin market gets absolutely crushed. And then that's where the Bitcoin dominance shoots up very, very quickly. So that's what I'm looking at today. That's your dubious speculation. Again, we have these t-shirts if you want them. I don't really know why you would, but if you do, we do have a store that you can buy that stuff in. I like them; they're pretty comfortable. But anyways, hopefully people have some cash to take advantage of some of attractive cryptocurrency prices the next few months. And if you're buying T-shirts, then you might not have as much cash. But anyways, we're gonna wrap it up there, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe. Give the video a thumbs up. Again, we do have Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.